Then I'll introduce you to Holly. So tonight, thank you for joining us for Along the Tidelines of History, 3 decades of warped wood. We're short a couple of years just because of COVID.
Right.
So we did lapse in 2020 and 2021, and we resumed.
Maybe people from living and working here during a pandemic.
Yeah, very challenging. And I want to thank Holly for joining us for this talk that she's going to be giving us tonight. And if you don't know Holly Gore is a writer and a curator who excavates the histories of art, craft, and design towards illuminating the present. Her recent focus has been on modernism and the work of building in wood, metal, earth, and stone. During the Warped Wood residency, she researched in our wonderful library upstairs, which is open to the public now as of 2024, February of 2024. So you're welcome to dig around in there. It's all things craft, art, and design, and then some. And she explored our archives on the beginnings of the program as a residency for wood turners. That's where we began, was really focused on wood turning and elevating it to an art form. In the process, she found that this turning legacy persists in shaping warped wood even today, as the residency has changed dramatically over its 30-year lifespan. So I'm going to hand it off to you.
All right. So first of all, thank you, friends, for being here, and thanks to Nava and Katie for organizing. I'm really thrilled to have the chance to spend time in this room full of exciting new art, and to be talking about this residency, which is such a great opportunity for artists and scholars. So around the end of last year, I started preparing the application, and I went online, started looking at the requirements for the scholar fellow, and I found that it was a fairly short application. They were asking for some writing samples and also asking for a proposal for a project that was going to be completed during the residency. And then I started thinking about that project and learning more about the museum, and I realized that 2025 was the 30-year mark since the residency had been founded in 1995. And I thought, wow, that's a pretty significant chunk of history, and I'd really like to dig into that and investigate. I'm often really interested in recent histories. I've done a lot of writing on 20th century art, craft, and design, and I think part of that fascination has to do with the fact that these are times that are separate from ours, but still connected, and I think intertwined with our lives in sometimes kind of unseen ways. So the project that I developed for the residency, which is also the basis for this talk, was to research and understand Warped Wood 2025, this year's cohort, as belonging to a larger history. With the talk, I'll pull together a few different things. I'm going to talk about the history of the residency, also my own experience as a resident, and I'll introduce each of the 6 artists whose wonderful works are in this room. So Along the Tidelines of History, 3 decades of warped wood. When I came up with this title, I was thinking of a tideline as a kind of a material trace, a kind of physical register of the contours of something that is so big and vast and constantly moving, and consequently very hard to see all at once. And in this spirit of tracing tidelines, I will avoid trying to describe an entire ocean of craft history tonight. I will spare you, and focus on some select kind of tangible elements of this residency and its importance as an ongoing support for contemporary craft. So what is warped wood? In its recent post-pandemic iterations, warped wood has entailed the following. A small group of artists convene in Philadelphia in the summer for 2 months. Residents live and work in close proximity. They have studios in the Next Fab makerspace. Artist residents have in common significant investment in working with wood, And with this, I mean woodworking in a very expansive sense of that word, a kind of wide umbrella that can encompass design, sculpture, contemporary art, furniture making, wood turning, or very specific techniques like marquetry. You had Clara Knutson, one of the artists this year, was focusing solely on marquetry during her time here. One of the residents is a student artist. One of the residents is a visual documentarian. And that just means that throughout their residency, they are documenting the goings-on of the residency, and it's very open-ended as to how they can do that. The Scholar Fellow joins the group for 1 week, a much shorter period. And then there are two public-facing events. There is an open house at Midpoint, and on the screen there's Assam Kamal from this year, who is speaking about his work at the open house. The fellows do a very short presentation at the open house. And then there is the culminating exhibition. The Warpwood is a craft-centric residency, and by this I mean craft as an approach to making rather than a category of objects. There's a lot in this room that I think you could easily call contemporary art, though many residencies or programs that are geared toward contemporary artists would not support the production of these kinds of objects because they are so reliant on skill and machinery and things that other residencies don't provide. Often you might have some really big, beautiful, light-filled studio spaces and a very basic shop for artists to use, but here in the Warpwood residency, that equation is kind of flipped. Next Fab has these, it is a cavernous kind of warehouse full of different specialized shops. So there's a woodworking, there's metalworking, there's textiles, there's 3D printing and jewelry, it goes on. So there's a lot of opportunity for this kind of material exploration and really skill-intensive work. And I think that's true of the residency throughout its 30-year history, though it hasn't always done it in this exact form. So the residency was founded in 1995 as the International Turning Exchange, or ITE. It was founded at the George School, which is a Quaker school in Bucks County. And it was explicitly to support wood turning, and more specifically, wood turning as art. So here is the first announcement for the ITE in 1995, and a photo of that first cohort at the George School. And then here are some photos from the 1996 cohort with folks having really different notions of what it might mean to do turning as art, but also what kind of materials and techniques that you might bring in addition to wood turning. So Hugh McKay's Blue Rose incorporates blue glass with rosewood, and Michael Brawley's Dancing Triclops incorporates furniture making techniques, and also I think a little bit, many of you may notice, and a little homage to a Wharton Esherick music stand, perhaps. And then Jean-François Ascoulin, La Métamorphose, I think a really lovely play on forms in the process of becoming. And I was really delighted to do a spin through the permanent collection earlier this evening and see that all of them are on view upstairs and look really much more arresting, I think, in person. Really great to see them. The establishment of the ITE was really integral to the emergence of wood turning as a viable field. And craft scholar Glenn Adamson has written about this at length, talking about, when does a technique become a field? And, of course, the answer being through community. You have communities of people working on it. You have institutions that support it, opportunities for mentorship, for employment, for exhibits and sales. All of these things that kind of make up that world of a field. And then, as in any good field, you have people who are kind of feeling it from within and saying, oh, I see these have some kind of parameters, and then pushing those outward. Then you really know you have a field. But in order to look at the significance of that and kind of appreciate it, I'd like to back up chronologically a little bit to wood turning in the early 20th century United States. So in the early 20th century, really about approximately through the 30s, wood turning was an industrial occupation. It was used in the production of things like balusters or wagon wheel spokes, which I'm showing here. And these balusters were made at the John Grass Wood Turning Company, which operated in Old City, just around the corner from here for many years. And then also showing the factory floor at the Hoops Brothers and Darlington company in Florida, and they are making the spokes for wagon wheels. Wood turning skill would kind of take a migration from these industrial contexts into the worlds of art and design throughout the 20th century. And one of the kind of conduits through this was manual training education. Manual training was a kind of education that was very prevalent in the early 20th century and predicated on the idea that hands-on work with wood and other materials had intrinsic value. And this was something that structured K through 12 education, as well as kind of after vocational training outside of that. And this was an idea that was brought to a range of agendas and scenarios. Industrial arts education, mainly aimed at men and boys, was aimed to cultivate material intelligence to improve American manufacturing. And as the decorative art scholar Ned Cook has written about, many early pioneers of wood turning were first exposed to the medium through industrial arts education as young people. And James Prestini, notable among them. Prestini made bowls from the early 30s through the early 50s, and then from there went on to had a complete change of medium and worked in metal sculpture. But during those years when he was doing wood turning, he was really this kind of singular figure, making these really arresting and beautifully proportioned bowls that became icons of American design. Progressive education was another place where wood turning flowed from industrial to arts and design contexts. I'm showing here some photos from Black Mountain College in North Carolina. This was a progressive college with a storied program in art and craft and design. The tableware I'm showing, there's kind of a turned bowl that was made in the woodworking shop run by a woman named Molly Gregory during the 1940s. And the students made these out of walnut. It's a simple design, it's very Bauhaus influenced, but the idea was that it should be easy enough to execute that someone with a kind of medium skill level would be able to do it. And Molly Gregory ran her woodworking shop as a kind of social lesson. I mean, sure, students were learning how to make things, but they were also learning how to be better people. And the idea behind this was that you would learn things like cooperation or leadership. If you were better at something, you could teach somebody else. Or, and I think most importantly at Black Mountain College, the idea that you were making real, tangible things for your community, for the benefit that people would use. And they did sell these bowls in order to benefit the school. And this idea of social responsibility took a really very large dimension at Black Mountain College in the construction of the studies building, and that's that very large modern building I'm showing at the top of the screen. And the way that the college managed to build this, they didn't have very much money. They had student and faculty volunteers who supplied most of the manual labor, and it was a lot. And of course, they were guided by local skilled tradespeople. And this is where there comes another dimension to the manual training at Black Mountain College, because the architect of the studies building, named Lawrence Coker, was very interested in using work with building and building projects as a kind of practicum for architecture students. He had the idea that people who had physical hands-on work with building in wood were going to be much better designers than those who solely planned things on paper. So you get these kind of multi-level uses of manual training at Black Mountain College, where wood turning is really just at that point another kind of technique that's being used. It's not really singled out in any kind of particular way. And the idea that hands-on work is something that is more than a mechanical act, really kind of generative of important understandings, is something that resonates with conversations I had with Nifemi Ogunro, who is one of the residents from this year, from 2025. Nifemi is a furniture designer and sculptor, and she came to woodworking when she began building her own designs and discovered that this work was more than the execution of a plan. It was taking her work beyond the things that she could visualize alone. Connections between objects and human body are integral to her work, and I love how she's photographed this early stool with herself standing on it and kind of her bent foot pressing into it. I think that's really beautiful. Nifemi has also designed objects that she has performers activate in dance performance. But for this residency, she decided to make freestanding sculptures. And I think even with that kind of remove, that physical remove, the notion of the body and gesture is never far from the works. So back to history. In the post-war era, contemporary craft transformed with the rise of the studio craft movement. Studio craft is the practice of craft as art, whether in the creation of objects that are functional and usable, or if their purpose is mainly aesthetic. Patron Aileen Osborne Vanderbilt Webb was a major figure in the rise of studio craft. She supported its development with funds, but also with a lot of national level institution building. Aileen Osborne Webb founded what is now the American Craft Council. She founded the Museum for Contemporary Crafts in New York, which is now MAD, the Museum for Arts and Design. Also the America House Gallery, which was a retail space in Manhattan for that craft artists could sell their wares at. And also the School of American Craftsmen, which was the first university-level degree program in craft. In 1957, the American Craftsmen's Council organized their first annual conference in Asilomar, California. And this was, again, a kind of an unprecedented moment where all these dispersed craftspeople were coming to one place from all around the country. The panel discussions there tended to divide along lines of medium. So fiber, ceramics, metals, jewelry, wood, and wood at that time was mainly meant furniture. And in one sense, these different areas of work could appear like spokes of an umbrella, each identical in their relationship to the whole of studio craft. But I like to think of them as a constellation of worlds, studio craft as a constellation of worlds, with each of these containing the makings of a field, having its own trajectory, its own actors, and its own timeline. I think this really shows in the fact that in the 1950s, which was a major era for studio craft, there was a lot of growth in the areas of textiles, ceramics, furniture, but feels like glass and wood turning would only develop in decades later. And for example, I'm showing here a spread from Craft Horizons magazine showing some tableware. I scoured Craft Horizons from the 1950s for wood turning and really didn't find much. And as the text in this feature tells us this tableware is not turned on a lathe, it is sculpted. And I'll just read a little excerpt. It says, unlike the typically symmetrical shape of lathe-turned bowls, all of these forms are meticulously dug out with gouges, shaped by the knife and sanded smooth in the hands of the craftsman. So, here a little bit of an equation of wood turning with something that's kind of conventional, ordinary. So definitely some kinds of value judgments being made about what a handcrafted object is and what it should do. But this doesn't mean that wood turning goes out of the public consciousness. Actually, quite the contrary. It was very popular in amateur craft scenarios. I also scoured Popular Mechanics magazine of the 1950s and found many, many, many references to turning. Here we have a feature telling you how to make a letter holder. There were many how-to projects in the magazine on wood turning, but also in the classified many listings for machinery and tools. So wood turning would have to wait for its critical momentum of organizing as a field of studio craft until the 1970s. And this is a history that runs straight through Philadelphia, through the founding of the Museum for Art in Wood, and through the Warp Wood Residency. So I'm going to just hit a few points along this timeline. So from 1976 to 1981, Albert Lecoff, along with his brother Alan Lecoff and woodworker Palmer Sharpless, initiated a series of wood-turning symposium at the George School, and Sharpless was the wood shop manager there. And these symposia brought unprecedented levels of organization and networking to wood turning. This is really and I'm showing a photo of one of those early symposia there on the screen. A really a historic genre-defining moment. In 1986, the Lecoff brothers incorporated the Wood Turning Center, now the Museum for Art in Wood, with Albert as its founding director. In 1988, the Wood Turning Center organized a touring exhibition of lathe-turned objects called the First North American Turned Object Show, and I think the name says it all in terms of the significance there. And in 1993 and again in 1997, Albert Lecoff organized 2 international wood-turning conferences, respectively at the Hagley Museum and the Winterthur Museum and Garden. And the first of these conferences was really the seed for the idea of an international residency, the ITE, now Warp Wood, founded in 1995 at the George School. So from the very early days of the residency, there was a built-in aspect of documentation and reflection. The visual documentarian role has been there since the first year in 1995, though I think they called it a photojournalist then. And then the scholar role was created the next year in 1996. Decorative arts scholar Ned Cook was the first scholar fellow, and he spent much of his residency doing wood turning, as he is doing in this photo on the screen. And this was his first experience with wood turning. He did not have prior experience with that. And he went into it wanting to bring that experience to his scholarship. He reflected that he saw it as opening up a dimension of understanding that was beyond what was conventional scholarly expertise, things like connoisseurship or the ability to identify different types of wood. So really someone who's taking that time to step back and think, what does it really mean to know something, and how can I write about it, from the inside out? And I think that kind of reflective quality persists in the residency. Assam Kamal, who was the visual documentarian this year in 2025, is a YouTuber with an absolutely wonderful channel. He does all of these fantastic videos of DIY projects, among them building boats that are seaworthy from never having built a boat before. Really wonderful stuff. But he decided for the residency that he wanted to take a step back from the online world and create physical, tangible objects, and also to move away from the tendency, I think, that many of us have. I know I've adopted it to consume images very, very quickly. And so what he did is he created a series of flip boxes, crank flip book kind of things that portray each of the 6 artist residents through just 1 minute of footage of their work. So really just memorializing that 1 minute and making that very, very special. So again, someone stepping back from what they usually do and taking that residency time to reflect on that. So going back to the residency timeline, throughout its 30-year lifespan, there were more changes. In 2001, the residency moved from the George School to the University of Arts in Philly, so it became an urban residency. In 2013, after a sustaining gift from the Windgate Foundation, it became the Windgate ITE. So here's Clara from this year, who is leading a marquetry workshop in her workspace. In 2022, the residency emerged from a 2-year hiatus during the pandemic with a new home at Next Fab, and this in the wake of University of the Arts divesting of its crafts program and ultimately closing. And in 2022, it also assumed a new name, Windgate Arts Residency Program in Wood, or Warpwood. So in one sense, this Warpwood story is a story of change. It goes from rural to urban, from a program that is explicitly grounded in studio craft and wood turning to supporting a very heterogeneous group of woodworkers. But as I spent time within the residency, I became attuned and I think very interested in the constants, those kind of through lines threading through the histories of the residency, wood turning, woodworking, connecting past to present, and really attuning to the ways that its history has shaped the experience now. And some of these observations are really straightforward. For instance, that international focus that the residency has, or if you look at the wall texts around here, these folks are from all around the world, and as well as the US. And that focus has been there since the beginning, since those first international turning symposia. Another through line has to do with the residency itinerary and the activities, the scheduled activities that have kind of been formalized to happen year after year. And just the residency is a 2-month period, and that is significant, but I think when you're dropped into a new place for a finite amount of time, I think those things that you do at the very beginning really can shape the whole experience. And you might notice that there is a lot of salvaged wood in this room incorporated into the artworks. Much of this was foraged at Penn Treaty Park in Philadelphia. We have showing some nice photos of that taken by Assam. And this is something, this foraging of wood is something that's gone on in the residency throughout its history. Here are some photos of Todd Hoyer, one of the residents, who is cutting a fallen tree in the George School woods. So when they were at the George School in Bucks County, they were, it was a much more direct thing to just go out in the woods and look for some turnable wood. And then in the photo next to that, he is making a piece from salvage wood with Haley Smith, another one of the residents. And I was really pleased to see this piece is also on view upstairs in cinders, and it's really stunning. I would recommend taking a look at it. So when the residency moved to Philadelphia, you had to make a little more effort to find wood. And that's when the residency formalized a kind of excursion to the Fairmount Park Organic Recycling Center, which is the place where all of the cut trees in Philadelphia go to. Eventually, many of them go in the chipper, but some of them become art when they go into the van that the museum has rented for the artists. And here are some photos of some of those wood finding excursions. But this year, unfortunately, some of the residents said, "Oh well, it was kind of bad timing at the organic recycling center, and that maybe a lot of the wood had gone to the chipper." And so that's when they organized the excursion to Penn Treaty Park, because they were still very, very kind of hungry for wood there. We see a lot of that the fruits of that excursion in the works in the gallery. Arden Carlson has incorporated this forked branch with a kind of wishbone shape into an Appalachian stick chair, and then incorporated this kind of surrealism element with a candle that's carved as one of the chair rungs. And I love how Arden's work is so dreamlike and very surreal, but they never fully leave behind the physical world because of the attention to these kind of hand-worked surfaces that really call out to the physicality of the wood. Alan Lang also used a lot of foraged wood in his work, and here I'm circling back to a photo I showed a little bit earlier of Alan in the Next Fab space. And he is the performance that he's doing here is the creation of the Xylo Medical Manual, this book that is on view in the gallery. And when I took this photo, I had encountered him. He had a booth that said, "Tell me your story." I sat down, I told him a story about kind of how I went from being a rock climber in California to living here and being an art historian. It was a very long story arc. I'd never quite told a story like that before. And Alan sat with me, and we sat for almost an hour, and he had this little tray of pre-cut little kind of pieces with little kind of images, little trees, an axe, a mountain, a feather, and he put them together and kind of made a little kind of archetypical representation of my story, which he then incorporated into the Xylo Medical Manual. And I love how Alan can use wood in a very purposeful way, like each of these little cutouts represents something very specifically, but then he's also got all of this found wood that's incorporated into the piece. He's wearing a mask, and he's got a kind of a turned wood goblet that's also found wood, and really leaning into how wood can enchant us as well as being something that's very utilitarian. Another cornerstone of the residency kind of itinerary are the visits to collectors and artists' studios. Every year there are scheduled trips that focus on the Mid-Atlantic area. They go up north to Bucks County and south to Washington, D.C. And I'm showing here a really wonderful sketchbook that Amy Forsyth created as the visual documentarian from 2019. And she sketched a kind of journal that captured, I think, so much of that kind of experience. So here on June 20th, with quite a lot of rain and clouds, they're getting in the car to drive to Baltimore and DC. But they had a Swedish dinner the night before with vodka and lots of beer, and they're going around this traffic circle saying, "I'm never going to drink again," and then have these wonderful stops that she's showing the workshop of our own, a wonderful workspace built created by and for women woodworkers. There are also trips to more historic sites. one of them being the Wharton Esherick Museum, woo, where I work, and the hand-built home of artist, sculptor, and furniture maker Wharton Esherick. And every year since I've been working at the Wharton Esherick Museum, which has been since 2021, every year that the residency has happened since then, the group has come and visited. And I love comparing here. I'm showing the dining room of the Wharton Esherick studio next to a collaborative piece by fellows Clara Knutson and Edgar Orlaneta. And I just think there are so many beautiful parallels to make beyond the kind of varied uses of wood, that these are artworks that really celebrate the histories that are contained within crafted objects. Anyone who's been to the Wharton Esherick Museum knows that these handcrafted rooms are full of stories. Also, I'll just, as an aside, Esherick was another person who was exposed to manual training as a young person, and there's really a lot of awareness of the history of building and craft in his interiors. History is a big part of Clara's works, and Clara's contribution to the collaborative piece is the marquetry. So she did the leaves and then that kind of pattern that's around them. And then the more kind of three-dimensional part was Edgar's contribution. But Clara encountered marquetry as part of a cabinet making program. And as she has pointed out, it was a very small part of that program because, as she said, people don't do marquetry as much anymore. But she really fell in love with the work and has endeavored to create contemporary relevance for that craft. And the technique of marquetry comes into her subject matter, this kind of piecing together of fragments. And for many of the works that she did during the residency, she took Philadelphia as her subject, as a city that is itself pieced together. Edgar is an artist who uses craft processes, I think, in a very deliberate way with incredible awareness of their history and their cultural resonance. So in his contributions to the collaborative piece, there's some kind of like built aspect, something that looks like a shutter, a shelf, a beautiful turned bowl that he's incorporated. And really doing so with a lot of awareness of what it might mean to have a handcrafted bowl or a built entity. I think even his choice of walnut, he's used a lot of walnut, I think is really deliberate, and this would have felt very different with a different kind of wood. Edgar has incorporated a lot of modernist motifs into the works he did during the residency, and I often feel like looking at these kind of layered works that he does is kind of like an archaeology of modernism. And then I think we can also, looking at this, say that collaboration is another through line within the residency from 1995 through the present. The Fellows visit to the Esherick Museum was my first time when I got to meet the group. So I had come here to the museum for the orientation, and then I had gone back to my life because my residency period was going to start a little bit later. But then I think it was week 2, the fellows came out to the museum. And at that point, I was able to take them around the Esherick studio, but also to kind of talk with them about my contributions to this exhibition, which were going to be the exhibition texts. I was going to contribute to those. They had been asked at that point to come up with a title for the exhibition, which must have felt rather early. They had really just met. None of these artworks existed, so it was really kind of an exercise in speculative writing. And they were very clear that they did not want anything that would circumscribe what they were going to do. They did not want a theme. And they were batting around some ideas, and a plank in a shipwreck was the one that really stuck. I think everyone liked it because it was a metaphor that could apply to many things. You know, a plank in a shipwreck is that thing you grab when nothing else works, and it's the thing that saves you. So that could be your art practice. It could be an idea. It could be the residency. It could be, you know, all kinds of things in the context of artworks that could apply to. But I think the thing that they really, where everyone was very attached to this idea, was that it was a notion of taking hold of something tangible and material, like a plank, and the absolute value in that material connection, which I think it's a really wonderful title. I think it speaks to the value of all of this work, the value of craft, and also by extension programs like this one that support it. And so I will just end with a little quote from Edgar Orlanetta. Edgar had just sent me some notes that he had come up with kind of on his musings on what this title meant. I think this is really beautiful what he's written. He says, "To work with your hands is to reject obsolescence, to inhabit time, to value process over speed. It is not nostalgia for tradition, but material intelligence. It is thinking through making. I think of art and its craft also as radical place and time, as practice that defies banality and that teaches you patience, openness, willingness, and solidarity." Thank you. And thank you all for coming. Yeah, thank you.
I have a question.
Yeah.
This might have been like outside the scope of your research. Maybe it was a rabbit hole that you went down. But I know that a lot of Quaker schools, Westtown in particular, have had like long histories of craft as part of their education. And like, you know, have needle points from the 18th century that their students did there. And I'm wondering if you found similar histories at the George School and maybe kind of through lines, you know, even before the Windgate residency of today in the international term.
Yeah, you know, I know very little about the George School. I think there are people in the community around this museum who do, however, people who've, you know, people like Albert Lecoff or people who've been in that community for a long time, but that would definitely be a worthy thing to ask about, like why, you know, why there? And because it did become such a major place for wood turning. And so, yeah, it's a great question to ask.
I can offer a little bit of extra insight on that. Palmer Sharpless, who was one of the original organizers of the wood turning symposia, and I don't know, like original mentors, and I don't know, the team of bandits who were putting these things together. He taught at the George School for many, many years, and he was Quaker. So I think that was how they got looped into that. And he was associated with programming this organization when it was the Wood Turning Center for many, many, many years, a collaborator and board member, involved at all levels.
Yeah. Any other questions, thoughts? Yeah.
What did you value the most out of your experience with the residency?
I think it was the opportunity to have a week where my time was my own and there were lots of possibilities for what to do with it. You know, there was nothing prescribed. I think I've said already, I felt like I was in the land of yes. I would be like, well, I think I want to work on the exhibition texts, or I want to research this, or I did take a turning class, though I think it was very different from the experience that Ned would have had in 1995, where it's a turning residency and you're kind of engulfed in that. I kind of went away from the residence and took a little class. But I think, you know, it was such a privilege to be able to spend time with them and talk about their practice. I mean, part of what I did with the exhibition text, so I wrote the intro panel, but we decided when we all got together that it would be best for the panels on the individual artists to be first-person artist statements, And so I offered to read and respond to them, which I did. And that was really a wonderful privilege. I think it made me think differently about writing as well. And it's sort of a creative space where you don't have to come up with a product right away. You know, you can really kind of just let it simmer of what is this going to be. Yeah.
I have a couple of questions.
Yeah.
First of all, your background in woodworking, how bringing that to your work, you know, as an academic, and then the work that you are doing now as an embedded staff member of an historical house museum dedicated to a history of 20th century woodworking to the present. How did this kind of week at the Land of Yes camp bring all of those? Was there like a gelling or a feeling of like of tying of knots, or what was that experience like for you? Because it's more often than not that the scholars who come into this program do not have the background, the hands-on background that you do.
Well, it's interesting because the kind of woodworking I did was, I think, more vocational than in art and design. So it was even though the tools are similar, the techniques are similar, it's really a world apart. And then, you know, I got interested in researching Wharton Esherick, and that took me on the path to becoming an art historian. But in doing that, I really left behind the hands-on work, and quite honestly, I didn't miss what I was doing. I was ready to be in another world. So coming back around to the residency, I wanted to take a turning class, but you have to get certified in the wood shop to do that. So I went through with Hannah, the wood shop manager. She gave me a piece of wood and said, okay, we're going to cut it on the chop saw, we're going to run it through the planer, we're going to change the blade on the table saw, we're going to do all these things. And it really felt wonderful. It felt absolutely wonderful to do those things. And I think I will find a place for that somewhere in my work going forward, but I don't know what it's going to look like. Yeah.
The second thing that I wanted to ask is, it's one of the aspects of the program that you mentioned is that it's adaptive over the years, that it has changed and evolved, hopefully alongside or at maybe a bit of a lag with the organization that presents it. That was felt to us most poignantly during COVID, where the challenge of hosting this kind of program was very clear, and I spent a lot of time going between having individual conversations with each prospective fellow, asking them if there was a way that they would prefer to continue with the residency during the prescribed time, but in a different way that would involve remote, involving kind of remote tools, and organizing it that way, providing, a project grant for each resident. We played with a lot of ideas, and in the end, the unanimous consensus for both years that were impacted by this pause was that they wanted the experience that they signed up for. They wanted to be in Philadelphia. They wanted to be living with each other. They wanted to be in the mess together, and they wanted that frenetic pace for these 8 or 9 weeks. They wanted all of it. Even unbelievably the part about being in an unair conditioned studio
sweaty, yeah.
They wanted.
Yeah.
They insisted on that.
Yeah.
So there have been recently a lot of questions about from scholars and visitors and participants about the future of such a program, which is to be honest, pretty all-encompassing. The museum underwrites the whole experience for the fellows. With all of these considerations and the history and this this sort of built-in preparedness for adaptability. How do you see the future? It's a big question.
Yeah,
but,
it's a big question.
But, any thoughts that you might have on the future of this program?
Well,
especially at a time when residencies for artists, it's sort of become more like a necessary, I don't know, destination in preparing an art practice.
Right, yeah.
And a career in arts.
Well, I think it should continue. I think it is a big investment, but craft is a big investment. And I think, like I kind of mentioned earlier, I feel like there's a lot in here that could be called contemporary art, but many contemporary art residencies or programs are not going to support this. And I think I was thinking, because I was reading some of the things that Glenn was writing about a field, and you have a turning as a field, and then is this a field? It's what is it? And it is a question of what is the future of craft. But when I saw this group come together, I don't know if it's a field or not, but there is a coherence in that investment in craft. Every single person in the program had a deep investment in making things, and you need to come together for that. You need those tools. You need those shared, Clara giving her marquetry demonstration. You need those kinds of things. And I mean, yes, it is a big investment, but I think it's a valuable one and an essential one, especially as we're losing so many arts organizations in the last years. Yeah. Yeah. Thank you.
Sunday is the last day for this exhibition.
Oh no.
Before it goes away. But our next exhibition opens November 7th. A Usual Past.
Reflecting on the nation's inheritance.
Thank you. Sorry, I haven't gotten all the way to my brain yet. But that opens November 7th, so please join us for that. And that will run through
February 15th.
Oh, and there's a gallery talk connected to that exhibition. Saturday, November 8th, 11 to 1. So you guys can join.
Yeah.
It's going to be
It's about office hours.
Yeah.
Which is really cool.
We have